Welcome to Tea Talks Unfiltered, the podcast where we drink tea, we talk, and they're both unfiltered. My name is Jake, and I will be your host. And on today's episode, we are drinking mystery tea, and we are going to be discussing the hierarchy of health practices, the process by which we reach towards immortality. But first, I have to wish everyone a happy Chinese New Year, happy Spring Festival. Today is the first day of the new year, the year of the tiger. So I wish good fortune, health, prosperity, success. I hope you guys are having a really good year. However you celebrate, I hope you have the chance to kind of take a moment and enjoy the Spring Festival. I was figuring it out with my wife last night. We were talking about how many New Year's I've probably celebrated here. And I think I've actually celebrated 11 or 12 Spring Festival, Chinese New Year in Wudang, in China. And way back from 2010. So 2011 would be my first one. And I maybe have come close to celebrating every rotation, because there's 12 animal zodiacs, right? You have the rat in order. You have the rat, the ox, tiger, the rabbit, then the dragon, snake, horse. After horse is the ram, the goat, the monkey, chicken, dog, and then pig is the last one. And this year will be tiger. I have a few more years. I'm a horse, so I'll have a few more years before we get back to a horse year. My daughter is also a horse, so that'll be really cool. But Year of the Tiger, a really, really good, fortuitous year for everyone. So I wish everyone the best. I hope you have a good year. Stay healthy, stay happy. All the best to you and yours. So on that note, cheers. Oh, okay, yeah. So I just referenced this as the mystery tea in the intro because I actually don't know what this is. It was a gift from a student a year or two ago, and she just gave it to us in like a couple Ziploc bags because it's like hand harvested. It's kind of rolled up like a oolong cha, kind of like in the little balls, but it's more dark, like a pu'er. But it lasts forever. Like you can use it for a couple days, it seems like, and then when it's done, you can boil it and you can get more out of it. And I need to figure out what the name of it is, because I think it might be one of my favorite teas. It's really, really nice, and it just lasts a really long time. So I need to do some investigating. But so let's jump into it. Today I want to talk about this hierarchy of health practices. Okay, this is a way that I've come to kind of build the process through which we should look at all the different options available to us when we talk about medicine, alternative medicine, these kind of practices. I want to take the opportunity to explain and kind of introduce the fundamentals of each one, but I want to lay it out in a way that you can understand and use it to perceive like the methodology to where you would improve your own health, right? Because I think that there's like root ways that we can, not necessarily self-diagnose, but in a way we can promote our own health. We can become our first doctor. You have to listen to your body and learn about these cues. And I think that there's a way that we need to perceive the self so that we can do that. And I think understanding all these different practices that are available and kind of the context of them is really beneficial, because then we can begin to, treat the problem before it becomes an issue. In Chinese they have the Chenyu, which basically translates to don't dig the well when you're thirsty. It's like you don't want to wait until the problem is already there to start to be prepared. You want to preemptively fix problems, create anthills, not mountains. You want to solve things while they're still easy. In the Tao Te Ching, it actually references this, like if everything is done when it's simple, there will be no large issues to deal with. So that's kind of the context of today's episode. I want to go through these in a pattern, starting with like the most fundamental, working through all these different practices with massage, TCM, herbology, cupping, all the way up until medicine, Western medicine as we use and see it today. And I want to talk about the relationships and kind of the functions of those different practices. Okay, so that is the overall subject for today. I think that this is a relevant subject for New Year's, even though it's a month later than regular New Year's for everybody else. But as we go into the new year, I think one of the biggest resolutions for everybody, one of the biggest wishes for everyone is to begin health practices, right? Is to begin some way, whether it's, working out or training martial arts or doing meditation or Qigong, learning something new in some way. I think everyone has that on their mind this time of year. It's like you're looking for some way to improve yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And knowing those tools that you can use and kind of trying out different things is really kind of the theme of this time of year. And so I hope that this conversation reaches you in good context and allows you to kind of plan a little bit more accordingly. Because while it's kind of the issue on everyone's mind, to be healthy, that gain, that commitment, that routine isn't always easily achieved. And I think that there's kind of a drop-off point in March where you start seeing less people at the gym. You start seeing these practices kind of start to suffer because of work and jobs and your daily life kind of takes over. And this happens. But I hope with this episode, you can look at things a little bit differently and see them kind of in a broken down process to where you can pick out the things that are the most beneficial for you to actually work on. Because like I say to a lot of students here, training doesn't just take place during class. Your work doesn't just take place during that 1 hour of work or those few forms you do a day. The practice is all the time, right? The posture correction, the breath work, the kind of awareness should immerse into your whole life, into your practice, into your day. Not just isolate during when you're punching and kicking and actually doing the kung fu practice or when you're doing your gym practice or however it is. I think that that's really something that needs to be fully immersed in to really realize the benefits. In doing that, we talk a lot about how, 90% of your health, for example, happens in the kitchen. Like there's these kind of adages and things we say. And I think a lot of that is really true. But there are other aspects to it that are uniquely important and significantly, necessary. Like we definitely need to pay attention to more than just our practice time. Especially if you're doing a long-term commitment. I know there's a lot of people following who are long-term students who have been practicing for years, doing really rigorous daily practice even. And for you guys, it's even more important because I think that when we start practicing martial arts, the reason why all these traditions are so prevalent throughout Taoism, throughout any physical practice really, is because they become much more relevant because you're putting your body through rigorous training, right? So all these issues start to become surfaced, right? And I think that one thing that happens here, for example, is we teach Tai Chi to people, and when they're learning, after 2 weeks, they start to have pain in their joints. They start to have discomfort, maybe difficulty falling asleep, different issues for different people, right? But generally, there comes a point where some of the newer students will say, I never had this problem before, maybe I'm practicing wrong, or maybe I shouldn't practice. And it's always an interesting kind of, dialogue we have to them, like to really explain that, a lot of these issues you've probably lived with for a while and you've just kind of compensated them, right? Like I think the human body, the human mind, everything about us, about our existence, the most kind of important part of the human psyche is that we are adaptable, right? In every sense of the term, we are subject to change, and we are created to, adapt to whatever situation, whatever circumstance, environment is necessary. And because of that, I think it's very easy for people to sacrifice health, for people to sacrifice their comfortability, their emotional well-being, their mental state, because we can learn to adapt and survive to the next day. And with that, in time, become chronic disease, chronic discomfort, chronic pain. And these kind of things, sometimes they can lay under the surface for a while without people being really fully conscious of them. And so I think that when we start to practice, right, we remove a lot of those layers and we bring those things up. Because, for example, you can live with a bad knee for quite a while in I would say, the modern society, right? Because we cater to issues, right? We create lumbar support chairs that, pick you up so you don't have to stand up, and they assist you when you sleep and correct your breathing, and everything is made in a way to cater to your issue in this sense. But not everything, unless you go out and seek it out and practice it, is made to improve and to correct those imbalances, right? You can kind of continue to exist by kind of compensating and negotiating with those issues. And so they can live under the surface for a very long time. And yeah, I mean, honestly, if you weren't going to practice, you might not have an issue. That is a fair point. But there is like a higher quality of life that you could be experiencing if you can remove those imbalances, right? Because this is the idea of Qigong. This is the idea of all these different internal practices that, especially with Taoism, we're correcting the body so that we can kind of take our rightful place in our environment, in our life, right? Is we can correct these things and kind of build ourselves up so that we can actually fully experience everything, rather than kind of being shorthanded because of something that we were unaware of. So that is kind of the perspective I want you to bring into this conversation. I want you to think that, these issues, they're not barriers, they're challenges, right? They're things that we need to work on, because everyone is born with a different constitution, a kind of a different level of quality, of talent, of ability, of luck. There's a lot of variables in there, right? There's a lot of different things that can influence your journey, influence your starting point and your destination. And I think understanding that and being able to adapt in a beneficial way rather than just kind of deflecting the issue is going to put you in a much better place, especially if you commit to the practice and you put the time in, you put the work in. You're going to recognize things that you may never have been aware of before. So that is my destination for this talk. So let's get into it. Okay. So I want to start with the most basic, right? I want to really introduce the system as a hierarchy. So as a pyramid, if you will. The base layer, the first thing we're going to talk about being the most important for any situation, what you should always kind of question first, right? So as we go through these processes, you can look at the first thing and you can say, okay, I'm going to, I'm going to balance the quality of this before I move on to the next thing. Like, is the problem here? And then it's like a flow chart. Move on to the next thing. If you can't fix it with this, then you can move on to the next thing. Okay? So the first subject, the most fundamental layer of health, the most beneficial way that you can correct any pain, discomfort, if it's a very subtle issue, is sleep. So we start off in kind of a really funny place because, it's kind of like it's the obvious answer, but because it's obvious doesn't make it less true, right? Sleep is, especially for someone training, for anybody, it is the most important thing to balance the qualities of our active lifestyle. Whatever amount of activity we have, we need to have rest, right? This is most important, right? We have the yang part of the day. We have those energetic parts of the day because we have the yin at night, because we have the sleep, because we have rest. We have that time for healing. We have that time for kind of decompression, so everything can kind of rework and clean itself out, detoxify, waste management, get ready for the next day. Most important thing for anything is the proper amount of quality sleep. Okay. So, but I do want to explain this a little bit more because, everyone knows this. Like, we do need to rest. We need to sleep. We need to make sure we take care of ourselves and stick to kind of appropriate schedules. But I think it goes even deeper than that, right? So when we talk about sleep, we often say, like, okay, everyone needs 8 hours of sleep, right? Every night. Particularly, it would be best if you slept during the night because that is the kind of relaxed part of the day. It is when energy levels drop. It is the natural way for us to kind of follow the sun rise and sunset and kind of sit with that balance throughout the year. And this is where I think we come to our first issue, because with sleep practices, with sleep on a daily practice, I guess it's a practice, right? We have to understand that so much has changed in recent years with one specific thing: lights, electricity. We have changed our entire lifestyle because we are now able to easily, with the flick of a switch, stay awake, go out, continue our day well into the night throughout the year, regardless of what time of the year, what season, anything. We can continue to eat out and party and read books and study and watch movies. And there is a very important aspect called sleep debt. And it is a resource that you have to pay back eventually. There's a lot of talk about, sleep schedules and how they adapt throughout your life. When you're younger, you require a lot more sleep. And as you get older, kind of middle age, kind of becoming an adult, you start to require less. And then there's a period where you start to require more sleep again and then less again, where it does kind of fluctuate. For example, my daughter, when she was born, she would sleep 13 hours, literally straight through. She would sleep from 8 o'clock at night to 9 o'clock in the morning. And that's really great. That's really healthy. But as you get to like 25 years old, okay, maybe not so much. Maybe there you're looking more to like an average of 8 hours. As you get into your 30s, 40s, it might even go down to about 6 is appropriate. And then kind of it starts to go back up. This could fluctuate. There are kind of talks about this. I think it even speaks about this in the Yellow Canon, the Yellow Emperor's Canon, the Huangdan. It talks about how this kind of ebbs and flows throughout your age for men and women. And while that's true, we do want to stick to just kind of the golden rule of follow what's natural. 道法自然. We always use this quote, and it's really important. We have a diurnal cycle. We have a daily cycle of energy in the body that rises and lowers. So we have this building and receding of energy throughout the day. And if we'll talk about this in more detail in later talks, but in this diurnal cycle, it's paired off into 2-hour sections. As we go through the day. So you have 12, and like we talked about in other recent episodes, we have the 12 meridians, right? The 12 meridian channels. And so throughout the day, your energy is kind of increasing and kind of being not necessarily isolated to one meridian, but it's definitely moving through that channel at a more excited rate than others. Okay, that's kind of like the work is being done on this channel for these 2 hours, and then it shifts to another channel throughout the day. And as it goes back and forth from a zang to a fu, from a major organ to a minor organ in the meridian channel system, it fluctuates back and forth throughout the day until it cycles back through, right? Now, excuse me, we'll get into all the different meridian channels and kind of details of each one in the future, but just to know that as you go through each one of these channels, that is the time of day that they are working on their kind of most important function. And during the night, those functions are cleaning the blood with the liver, cleaning the bile with the gallbladder, going through and kind of engaging the triple burner and the water levels, returning the body to a state of homeostasis, to that balancing point, right? And that's really important. That's a big job for the body. That takes time for the body to kind of take all the nutrients and break everything down, kind of prepare for the next day, right? And if we're still eating, if we're still kind of engaging our mind and our body in some way well into the night, it's very easy to disrupt that system, right? And disrupting that system is going to carry over into the next day, and then it's going to influence the rest of the workload, right? And so that's pretty easy to understand. You need to have quality sleep. You need to be able to take care of that time of day. But I think the two things that I want to draw attention to are just the seasonal practice of sleep. I think that there's an easy rule to follow, and that is just follow the sun. If it's possible, follow the sun, right? So we do have energetic change throughout the year that we are products of our environment. We are definitely closely attached to, right? And so when we say follow the sun, literally we can say in the summer, we wake up early, we go to bed late because the day is at its fullest, right? In the fall, we wake up early, but we go to bed early as well because the sun is starting to get, the days are starting to get shorter. The sun is coming down sooner during the night. In the winter, we wake up late and we go to sleep early because the day is at its shortest. And in the spring, we wake up late, but we also stay awake later. So we're starting to kind of get more energy throughout the day, right? And I think that this is really important. This would be a lot more traditional. Of course, there are people who, are more night owls and maybe it's more natural for them to stay up a little bit later. I'm speaking more generally just across the average population, because I think that that's really important to just understand that there is a time for rest. There is a fluctuation of that during the year that's natural. It's natural for you in the cold part of the year to sleep more when you're in that during that winter solstice at the shortest time of the year. It's very natural for you to rest more than usual, and to not feel bad about that. I think that there's a big cultural implication of that where, during the summer it fits because everyone's going outside, everyone's moving, traveling, summer break, you've got lots of activity. And so that's really natural already. But then when we get to winter, I think people don't take the time to replenish themselves and prepare for the next year because we're still living on summertime, right? Because we have power, we have heat, we have air conditioning, we have everything we need to continue the party, right? And to, live to our fullest. This is true, and it's good that we have that opportunity, but I think it's very important to make sure that you take care of that time of year and that quality of sleep and rest. Okay. Also with rest, we have to say that it's not just sleep, right? I know a lot of cultures in China and a lot of other cultures that we have the siesta. Okay. So the afternoon nap, and that is the greatest tradition ever. If you can incorporate that in your life somehow, that is fantastic, because the daily 8-hour work schedule is a very modern invention. And it doesn't always suit the population. It doesn't always suit people, right? We have, if you think of the Taiji too, the Taiji picture, the yin-yang symbol, when yang energy builds at its most extreme, there is a hint of yin. There's the beginning of yin energy, right? It is the start of that relaxation. So when we look at that diurnal cycle, and I talked about the daily practice throughout the meridians, during the afternoon, we have the heart channel is active. And the heart has to do with the spirit. It has to do with, the well-being, of the kingdom of your body, right? It is the most important aspect, we could say, right? And at that point, that is the middle of the afternoon, the hottest time of the day. And that is when people go back indoors, they get out of the sun, they get out of their work, and they have a rest. This doesn't always mean take a nap. It could mean take a nap, but it also just means kind of taking that moment when you're at your peak, when you're at your highest point of energy for the day. You want to make sure that you don't overexert yourself and burn your candle out. You don't want to damage yourself because you're right on the threshold, so to say. And so at that point, we work with the body, and we rest, and we bring everything down, and we maybe meditate, maybe read a little bit, maybe take things slowly, take a nap. All these things are really good because it's compensating for that extreme energy, right? And I think this is the point where in the modern world we all burn out. Everyone's looking at the clock, whether you're in school or you're at work. 2 to 3 o'clock, you're just looking at the clock, and that's when the clock suddenly seems to move slow, right? And this is because at this time of day, you have a lot of energy and you're trying to move quickly, but your body is starting to kind of overexert itself. And then by the time people get home, I think after 4 or 5 o'clock, you're getting home, you've burned out and you've maybe used that last bit of energy. And now you don't have the energy for the night, for those things, those self-care practices, the time for you to have a good meal, the time for you to have, those hobbies, your own practice, those things that we do, those social activities that we do with our family and friends in the evening. Suddenly there's a very big influence of your tiredness, your weariness, and you're not able to kind of perform or enjoy those as much as you would be able to otherwise. And so I think that that's one of the things that a lot of the Asian countries have still as a good tradition, is that siesta, is that relaxing, that waning during the biggest part of the day, the hottest part of the day. So for sleep, remember, it doesn't always have to mean sleep, going to bed, laying down, but there are other parts of the day where it is really suitable to take a moment to meditate, reflect, be quiet, remove the screens, whatever it is for you. There's that point where you have to prepare for the rest. Okay. So that's level 1. The very first thing we have to always look to is we have to look towards the rest, the quality of sleep, because that is going to directly influence our activity, right? And so you can't have one without the other. You can't have your yang energy without yin. You can't have all of your active promotion, increase of health and longevity without having some kind of yin energy, without having that rest to restore yourself. Okay, so always look here first. If you have an issue in any sense, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, always look towards the quality of sleep, because that is definitely the first thing that's going to impact you. Okay. After that, I'm going to kind of go through a couple of these a little bit quicker so we can make sure we get through all of them. But after that, we're going to go into the next most important thing, which is diet. Okay, food. Again, here we're looking at all those practices, the things that we need to maintain that energetic level every day. The metabolism, keeping up the rate of our body's performance, of the function of ourselves, right? And so while sleep, we're dealing with energetic levels. Now we're dealing with that kind of maintenance of those levels, right? We have to have substance. We have to have kind of fuel to be able to continually push the machine, to continue our practice, to continue our life, right? And so here we get into a really big subject once again. I think diet, we have to look at it at a basic level first, and we have to kind of, challenge our dinner table and look at the variety of food we're getting, look at the quality of food, look at the seasonal relationship of the food. There is a lot of, again, that kind of modern society coming into our kitchen where anything is available at any time, any part of the world. And this is really good. This is like a great opportunity for us to try new things and to experience and to get nutrients from all over. But there is also a really important aspect of getting the nutrients, the minerals, the quality of food from your environment, and making sure that you're not just eating the same food all the time, making sure you're getting a variety of color, a variety of types, right? Making sure you're not isolating, one thing and eating that all the time. The body is the most adaptable. And because of that, it thrives on challenge. It thrives on variety. Variety is the spice of your kitchen, of your life. And so use that. Make sure that you're looking for those kind of foods that are seasonal to your area, making sure you're following that. We have a really easy model that you can follow is anything in the spring that shoots out of the ground, eat that. Like your celery, garlic sprouts, anything that shoots, anything that has this kind of like a bamboo shoot. Okay, all these things that kind of come out of the ground in the spring, those are the kind of things that we're looking for, those kind of vegetables, right? Those kinds of greens. As we get to the summer, we want the things that bloom, right? We want the flowers, literally some flowers, but also things like cabbage, things like broccoli, things like cauliflower, things that kind of open up, right? These kinds of things. Also red, like tomatoes, okay? Like anything like that that comes out in the summer, in those hot seasons. Watermelon, right? Something that bursts with energy. You want to kind of not necessarily only eat that, but I think that there's going to be a bigger amount of that on your plate, okay? As you get to fall, you want to think of those things that are harvested, right? So your pumpkins, your corn, beans, different kinds of things like that are closer to the ground. You have that kind of receding energy coming into play, but also those things that are harvested, like, okay, apples, things that kind of produce that time of year once a year, naturally, right? So we're looking in that way, that part of the garden, right? And then as we get into winter, you're looking for those salty things, the things that grow under the ground, your carrots, potatoes, your tubers and roots, also your seeds, like things that retain energy in preparation for the next year. So that's when we start eating a lot of walnuts. We start eating a lot of kind of, again, salt is the flavor of winter. And so you want to seek those kinds of things out and make sure you're balancing your plate. So that way you have a variety, not just on a daily level, but also on a seasonal level, right? This is a really easy way to adapt throughout the year and make sure that you're doing different things, because we talk about that meridian system, the energetic system of the body. In our practices, we look at that as there is a ebb and flow throughout the day, also throughout the year, also throughout our lives. So as we go through each one of those seasons, there is a point to be made for us to kind of get those different nutrients, get those different energetic qualities so that we can filter, we can adapt, we can grow. And I think that following what is natural, what is seasonal for you is a really good way of doing that, because it's very simple, it's very direct, and it doesn't require a lot of practice or understanding, right? You don't really need to memorize a pharmaceutical sheet of information from your traditional Chinese medicine pharmacy. You don't need to research a lot. You might need to look up what is natural, what is seasonal for your area. Look up some of these fruits and vegetables that come out more during what part of the year. And the one thing you'll help you recognize which ones are cheaper. That's a really good aspect to it, because if you're not buying watermelon in the winter, it's going to be a lot cheaper in the summer. And so that's one thing, save you some money, but also it's going to put you into the most natural food of that time of year, right? And the most, hopefully, nutrient dense food, because it's made for that time of year, right? We're not changing it. We're not altering it genetically in order to just produce. We're just collecting. Okay, this would be the best, right? Not available everywhere to get such organic, but at least you can follow the natural season, right? And then that's going to put you right on a higher level right away, just because you're getting that kind of reflection of the environment. Very important to kind of change your diet. Okay. When we get into diet, I also want to talk about the other end of it, bowel movements. Okay. So funny subject, something that I think we're going to go into a lot more detail later, but make sure that this is the system throughout the the year, throughout the day, you want to, with sleep, for example, you want to not just check that you're not pushing the envelope with when you go to sleep, but you also want to wake up refreshed, right? So you want to be able to not just understand that system, but actually be able to kind of diagnose it, like see what the quality is and how do we experience that. For sleep, we would say, am I staying up when I'm well tired? Would I have red eyes? Am I pushing it way too far into the night? And then when I sleep, if I'm waking up, am I actually feeling refreshed? Do I actually feel restored? Do I have dry mouth, red eyes? These kinds of issues. We can directly understand that with sleep, right? With food, we have to think about that as well. Like, are you eating until you're stuffed, right? Are you eating so much that you're not hungry for your next meal, but you still eat again? Are you constipated? Are you, not on a regular schedule of eating and bowel movements, right? I think that this is really important. And I want to go really deep into some of those practices and details in a few other episodes. But I do want you just to bring your attention to the quality of food intake and output. This is really important. Having quality food of variety that is hopefully close to seasonal at regular times and never overdoing it. I think that there's a really good rule that you can pretty much just say, anytime you eat or drink, go to 80 or 90%, right? You don't need to eat until you're completely full, until your stomach's heavy, until you lose your appetite. You can eat when you still have an appetite. You still want to eat. You can stop, right? The food will still taste good later, right? The food, it'll always taste good. You buy a cookie tomorrow, it'll still taste good. You don't need to eat it every single time, right? You can wait. That's an important thing. And diet is definitely the biggest challenge for everybody, because it's something that we have the power of choice, and that control, sometimes we can get drunk with power. So literally in the case of, if you're always choosing something to drink. But I just want to draw your attention to that. Make sure you're bringing high quality, high energetic food into your life, into your body, but also try to keep that on a schedule and keep it routine and quality enough to where your bowel movements, to where those times of your day can also be routine. They can also be set at a certain time. They can also be healthy and not something that you go multiple times and it's always kind of a random thing and you don't know what the quality of it's going to be. This is an observation we also have to do, right? Because this has to do with our metabolic rate. This has to do with the quality of healing and restoration in the body. And if your body is not digesting these nutrients, then you're missing something, right? You're missing something else that might be putting you at a disadvantage, right? So always kind of look at both ends of the spectrum, okay? Dinner table, really, really important. Bathroom, equally important when we talk about diet, okay? After that, once we get the energetic level, the metabolic level kind of understood, and okay, this is balanced, we still have issues, this is when we actually finally start getting to exercise. We start getting to the ability of the body. Not just the quality, not just the functionality, but the ability, the talent, the coordination, the flexibility, the posture, these kinds of things, okay? This is when we get to these corrections. So a lot of issues, if it's very superficial, it's very early on, you can correct it with good sleep. If you injure yourself even, maybe rest would be enough. Okay, if it's a serious injury, then okay, yeah, you're going to need some kind of rehabilitation. You're going to need some kind of basic practice, something from a health situation. It doesn't have to necessarily be like a sport activity where you're competitive, but definitely that posture correction, functionality, understanding basic movements, being more stable and mobile. This is what we talk about when we talk about exercise. Sorry, I think the first level, before we even say like kung fu training or jump kicks or acrobatics or heavy weightlifting, I think we have to look at exercise as another spectrum of introductory kind of fundamental understanding of mechanics. Being able to understand the body and correct those kinds of daily activities that you're going to be doing, right? So when we say exercise, it doesn't necessarily have to be pro level fitness, right? It doesn't have to be competitive, martial arts. It doesn't have to be something that's done at extreme level. Again, once you get to that level, you're going to have to pay even more attention to all the fine details because you're running the body at an extreme level. And with that extreme level becomes extreme consideration, right? For every detail, every aspect of your day. Very important. But when I say exercise as a health practice, I mean those functional practices. I mean, we have to pay attention to our posture. We have to pay attention to how we conduct ourselves, how we breathe, how we interact with our daily practices. Whether that's just getting in a car and going to work, whether that's sitting down at a computer, whether that's running in the morning, whether that's stretching, doing martial arts practices, sparring, whatever that may be, we have to take a really close look at those exercise skills, right? I think everyone knows the experience of kind of, even if you don't, the experience of going to the gym and seeing people who don't know how to use the machines, right? You've seen those video clips of people, running around and pulling things the wrong way and jumping and sliding and not really understanding the machine and how it's utilized, right? When we talk about a weightlifting gym, it's a good example because we're all fairly familiar with the machinery, at least the look, the usage, even if we don't practice. But even going there, it's something that as a personal trainer, I know that there's a lot of people who go and don't necessarily understand each individual machine, and it becomes kind of this foreign object, and they just kind of guess and try something. And while it is a practice, those machines are designed in most cases to specifically isolate a certain range of muscles and work them a certain way. And that is kind of the highest potential increase of hypertrophy and okay, we can get into the scientific stuff later, but that is the way these machines are kind of created is to attack a certain range of muscle work. Okay. And so you have to look at the physical training kind of like this as well. Like with everything, there is a criteria. There is kind of a subject matter that we're working on with exercise. And we have to know what the context is so that way we can actually improve the system, right? And so when we talk about functional exercise, we need to know how are we engaging the body when we pick something up off the ground? How are we being able to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day, and does that affect our posture a certain way? We normally situate our desk. Most people are right-handed. We place things on our right side. That tends to create an imbalance to where we might lean subconsciously to the right more often. And that might create a blockage in the right shoulder versus the left shoulder being very weak, being very mobile, but being very weak. And so there's these functional aspects to exercise that are really important, right? That are definitely more chronic, more in our daily life than just understanding, how to do a 540 jump kick. There are pro level fitness qualities, but I think at the very basic level, we all have to understand the fundamental body mechanics. We all have to understand how to coordinate the body. We need to have ourselves in touch with these practices and aware of our weight distribution, aware of our posture during activities and during rests as well. So every time we go into a system, we have to approach it backwards, right? Those fundamental levels, why it's a pyramid is because they're necessary, right? Posture is something we have to pay attention to when we sleep. It's something we have to pay attention to when we eat. All these things still matter because it's a progressive hierarchy, right? So if you're eating laying down, if you're sleeping on your side curled up, these kinds of things are going to affect your posture, definitely, because those are our biggest two habits, right? Sleep, drink, and eat, right? Those are like the biggest things. And the bowel movements too, still very important because the posture during all those things is going to directly affect the quality, right? If you sleep on your back, most like beneficial position, But a lot of people might have back pain. Putting something underneath the legs to bend the knees, raising those up a little bit is going to help. But a lot of people might not know that, so they'll sleep on their side where they can curl their knees and bend the body. But then they create a lot of neck pain. Maybe your arm falls asleep. Your hips are closed the entire night, so you lose a lot of flexibility on the side of the hips. You might have a lot of bad breathing problems and sleep apnea from that. If you're eating and you're moving around while you're eating, you might, not have very good digestion. If you're going to the bathroom, kind of sitting down and looking at your phone for 10 minutes, you're not going to have good bowel movements and create blockages and constipation. There's lots of really important exercise in those kind of activities. I always tell people when we do practice here, we talk a lot about correcting posture, like sinking your shoulders down, grounding the back, keeping the weight drop down through the body. And I try to bring people's attention to your daily activities. When you brush your teeth, do you raise your elbow up in the air and move your entire arm? When you drink from a bowl or you drink a cup, do you tuck your neck down and drop your chin? That kind of stuff is going to come back. I think maybe the biggest one, we look at our phone. Do we look at our phone down on our lap and curl our entire body and round our back off? Those things are definitely having their impact because the human body is made to adapt. And when you give it something enough times and turn it into a routine, it will start to change to suit that. Now, that might be fine when you're doing that activity, but when you leave and you go to walk away, you're going to experience a lot of discomfort, a lot of rigidity, a lot of pain potentially, because now you're trying to do something active, but your body is already adapted to those inactive aspects of your life, those sedentary aspects, right? So really important to understand that on a level of basic body mechanic, right? Exercise goes from health to sport to professional, right? And we have to look at it at a functional health aspect before anything else. And even within health, we have a spectrum, right? So always think of those fundamental issues. Think of those flexibilities, those coordinations, the conditioning, the strength and weakness of yourself and of yourself during those certain activities. That's really the best way to look at it, right? So energetic, metabolic, ability, right? Now we finally actually get into health practices. We finally get into actual treatments, okay? The next thing we want to talk about treatment. So we want to talk about our constitution, what we would call the constitution of our self in Chinese medicine and in medicine in general, I suppose. Because now we're talking about specialized practices, right? Everything else is general. Like we have this sleep practice. Okay, just everything alive has to deal with that. Diet, even more so. Exercise. Okay, now you're getting into something where it's like you have to kind of question and kind of investigate a little bit farther. But it can still be pretty general, right? Like everybody's body for the most part works the same way. Joints bend the same way, organs function the same way. Your system of the body is uniform, right? For the most part, everyone's going to have a different quality of that, right? So now we get into the treatment. Now we get into that constitution. We get into the differences, those subtleties between one person to the next based on your tendencies. Are you more prone to indigestion or are you more prone to some kind of health imbalance, right? And now with this, we can start to go into those deeper layers. Okay, so practices here, I would say we're going to be talking about massage. We're going to be talking about chiropractic work. We're going to be talking about acupressure and acupuncture, talking about some of those surface level practices and treatments that you can do, what we would term alternate medicine in English. Not really an appropriate name, but I think just so you understand what we're considering. We talk about cupping, scraping, bleeding, moxibustion, electrotherapy. These kind of practices that, while they're treatments, they're superficial, right? They're something that's specialized to you and catered to you in this specific injury or disease, but it's not something that's very invasive. It's not something that's like isolated to that kind of mechanic view where we're changing parts, where you're going to cut this out or take this medication or do something really intense to the body. It's still on a kind of general level where it's like, okay, you have discomfort, you have pain. Okay, we're going to massage the muscle tissue. And hopefully this is like a short-term treatment, right? It's not a long-term treatment. This isn't something you're going to live with. This is something that's like something you can balance in your daily life, right? Acupuncture, acupressure, this chiropractic massage, cupping, scraping, these are all really important because these are just things that you can do when you overexert yourself in some way, especially with, sleep, exercise, right? This is just a way that you can assist the body in returning to that balanced state before it adapts and kind of covers up that problem, right? I think people who have an injury, there's that period of time we have to look at where you have a period of being injured during the peak pain, the actual injury itself, the traumatic experience. But then you have the healing process after, which is still discomfortable or still uncomfortable. It's still painful. It's still not balanced yet. But then after you're healed and the body's actually done, you still have a ghost of a healing time. That is where your body is trying to completely return to a balanced state, right? And that's often the most kind of potentially dangerous time of your injury because people I'm talking about light injuries even, for example, if you sprain your ankle, very easy, very common rotation, inward rotation of the ankle that happens. And often that can happen. And then right as you're starting to feel better after maybe a few days, a week, people can have return injuries because they start to do activity again and it's not actually balanced yet. And it can easily kind of go out of place, right? Because it's still, you think about it being overstretched and you think that when you go back to that activity, it's not quite strong enough to maintain its position. Very easy to do it again, right? And so you think that, okay, there's this overexertion that can happen because the body's adapting, right? It is able to kind of get rid of the pain, get rid of the discomfort and say, okay, I'm ready, but it's still kind of working on that process, right? So we say injuries take, 6 weeks to heal, but they take, 8-10 weeks to fully recover, right? There's like another period of time there that you might not feel pain, but you need to pay attention and kind of take it slow. Especially like you're talking about something like a bone break, very, very similar, the bone will be healed. It'll technically be together and fused again, but there's that period of time where things are still brittle, things are still soft, especially if you're like a younger person who's still growing and just had a bone refused together because of a breakage. There's always these periods of time where we have to be more aware, more conscious of activity because we're rehabilitating, right? We're reintroducing movement as well. So there is this small period of relearning where we have to make sure that we're doing it in a functional way. So that way the body will continue to heal rather than kind of compensating for that and kind of maintaining that issue under the surface, right? I know a lot of knee injuries are like this. People will injure their knee and then that becomes their bad leg. And when they're healed, they just how would you say, they don't use that leg. They know that's their bad leg, and so they kind of just hide it and just say, "Oh, I'm not going to use this on this side. It's my bad side. It's my bad leg." And so they actually kind of hide the problem themselves, and they never challenge it. They never allow it to adapt and fully recover. So there's you got to think healing, recovery, and then you also have that recovery of function where we have to actually start to practice it again. To slowly reintroduce movement so we can return to a full recovery. So I think that there's treatment there, but we have to look at that more short term. I don't think that some things are always going to be healed by these practices because when they become chronic, we have to go to deeper layers. Right now we're dealing with constitutions, so we're dealing with these tendencies. We're dealing with those things that people are more prone to, right? This is where I think you would start to look into these things like scraping and cupping. This is a little bit deeper. Cupping is basically those hot hot glass cups that you would, well, now they're not hot, but you put oil inside and you burn and you put it on the skin, and it sucks the oxygen out, and it sucks the skin and breaks the blood vessels and causes a lot of like bruising, surface layer bruising, basically, on the back, depending on what part of the body that you do it. Typically on the back, the shoulders, things like this. And what you're doing here is the body, that cup is sucking the blood vessels on the surface layer of the skin, and it's bursting them, right? It's breaking them because of sucking all the oxygen out. And that's why we get the bruising. And then what that bruising does is the body goes back to that inflamed area now and breaks down all those blood vessels, kind of reabsorbs all those nutrients, and then recreates those structures in the epidermal and the skin layers, right? In the muscle layers. And so that cupping, what we talk about in Chinese medicine, is removing toxins, is like the kind of general term for it. But I think a better way of looking at it is really looking at it scientifically and saying, we're kind of pulling everything to the surface, and now the body can reabsorb it, maybe get rid of it, exchange it with the new layer of skin, these kinds of things, and recreate these blood vessels. So that way, that stagnation that was occurring there, that kind of blockage that was there, hopefully will be removed, right? So you might have, like, the first time you do cupping, it might be super dark. And then as you go, you'll notice some of the places that are less painful, the ones that don't have any discomfort, they won't be as dark. They'll be more of like a pink or a red. Like, they'll still be bursting there, but there won't be that dark kind of black purple bruising, right? And so I think that's really important. Just understand that on that level where your body needs to kind of erase those blockages and then reinstitute a healthy functional practice underneath. So that way that issue doesn't come back, right? And so like things like cupping, scraping, where you take a stone like edge thing, or sometimes bone, they have different ones, plastic ones, and you actually like run it and push down the length of the muscle and kind of rub the muscle on a deep layer kind of massage. That's going to produce a similar thing where it's going to burst all those blood vessels and cause bruising, especially around places that have stagnation, joints that have kind of mobility issues, right? But the idea is there, you're complementing that practice with everything else we've said. You're complementing it with exercise, functional practice. You're complementing it with a good diet to give the body the healing and the nutrients that it needs to return to a balanced state. And then you're resting on top of that, so that way the body has time to actually engage those processes, right? So all very, very important. Make sure you're always going backwards with each practice. Okay. I want to talk about last two just to kind of give you some final notes. After we go through the constitution and we go through these treatment practices, picking out which one is best for you to kind of get rid of the onset of those chronic issues. Those issues might actually already be chronic, right? And you might find that massage, chiropractic work, acupuncture, these kinds of things, moxibustion, these kinds of things are beneficial, but the results that are yielded from it might be short-lived. So you might find that if you go for a massage, you feel good, but in a few days that issue starts to come back and you feel like, maybe I need to go for another massage. Maybe, but also this issue might be deeper than that. It might already have set in and become like a habitual practice, right? So now we get into TCM. Now we get into what I would call the chronic level, or zangfu. So we're talking about the organs. We're talking about the relationship in the deep layers of the body, those meridian networks, okay? So this is going to be a lot deeper. This is going to be tailor fit to the individual, right? So with everything else, really general: sleep, diet, exercise, and this treatment, even the treatment with massage and chiropractic work, acupuncture, this is still really general. You're treating the person as a human, right? You're treating them as a body, as a universal kind of tool that everyone has like a tendency. You have general movement, you have general diet, you have season, you have sleep practice. Okay, very, very general. Now when we get to this level, what we can call the zangfu, the organ, the chronic level, I would say this is where we start to get specialized to the individual, right? At this level, now we can talk about that person, not just as a human, but as a person. what is their deep layer constitution. Here is where we're going to have these practices like taking certain herbs or Chinese medicine pills. This is where we're going to have pulse taking, or what we refer to as the 4 pillars, the Wang Wen Wen Qie, which is to ask, to look, to feel. To smell, to look, and to feel. Okay, so let me say that one more time to make it clear. We're going to look, smell, ask, feel. Okay, so these 4 things really important. The first thing, we're going to observe the individual from a practitioner's point of view, from the clinic, and we're going to observe them as a person, like their body type, their constitution, muscle level, weight, height, quality of quality of breath, quality of their gait, functional ability, flexibility. We're kind of investigating these qualities, right? We're also smelling. So there's smells that need to be done. You need to smell the body, what's being produced, the sweat, the bowel movements. These things all matter as well, to see that quality of those functions. Then you have asking questions, history, listening to the timbre of the voice, kind of understand the emotional state, also the history, the medical history, things like this. And you also have feeling, which is where we take the traditional pulse taking. Now, I say I'm not really well qualified. This is a hobby and like a study of mine, but if you go to like a proper professional Chinese medical practitioner, that is the tradition of taking the pulse and actually reading the quality of the physical body on different levels, like that communication between the different meridian channels and organs of the body, the quality of that, the imbalance of that, and being able to diagnose and prescribe something, right? So this is where we're getting to the actual specialized stuff, where I will say things like prescribed. Everything else, general. Everything else, okay, this is kind of the way it goes, and this is how you attune yourself to it. When we get to this level, we can actually say we prescribe things. So now we're getting to the level where everything becomes specialized. Everything becomes, you specifically require this to correct these imbalances, because these sleep problems or diet problems or your functional exercise kind of practices, these have all failed, and to some degree you've developed a chronic issue, right? You've developed something deep in your body that's already adapted, and we need to work on that to kind of correct that communication, so that way you can go back through those levels, those other complementing practices of exercise and diet and sleep, to correct that imbalance, right? So this is when we're going to talk about taking herbs, taking these specialized formulas, okay, that are prescribed for certain diagnosis. Okay, so right, like I said, you got a lot of stuff to work on before you get to some of these levels. For the final level, this is where I include Western medicine, right? This is where we include kind of modern technology. And this is definitely what I would deem everything else, okay, sleep, energetic, diet, metabolic, exercise, functional ability. Then you get to your treatment, dealing with the constitution. Then you have specialized treatment, like with Chinese medicine and formula taking, pulse taking, tongue diagnosis, observing at a very close level. Well, now is when I would say, after all those steps have been gone through, now we're looking at emergency medicine, right? We're looking at trauma. And this is, I think, where Western medicine is essential and definitely its rightful place. There are, of course, minor issues that can be solved with Western medicine, but one of the issues that happens a lot is the aspect of symptom chasing, right? Where you take a pill because you have this discomfort. We can talk about headaches, coughing. We can talk about lots of things like this. And it's very true. Western medicine has promoted health and pushed you into longer health, longer age, better health, longevity, better well-being. Everything has improved because of Western medicine. This is 100% true, and that is kind of its best thing, because the human body is so adaptive, and Western medicine is so fine-tuned to all those changes that it really can be utilized for so many things. The problem happens when we use it as a tool for every issue, right? And this is where we very quickly kind of hide issues, right? Where taking medication for headaches, if you have headaches all the time, is going to eventually lead to other issues like liver conditions and problems like this. And we can only speak about this as an individual. Speaking as a large population, it's difficult because you can't really say that this medication is bad. No, Western medicine is very, very good for the general population. But we should look at it as an individual perspective and understand that Western medicine, what I deem Western medicine, I should say modern medicine, we're talking about surgery, medication, isolating intense symptoms and dealing with those in a traumatic emergency sense, right? This is what I'm really referring to. And I think that this kind of stuff, it should be, in most cases, it should be like your last resort. It should be, hopefully you're able to deal with an issue before it becomes a problem. But of course, there's some things you can never prepare for. And that's where modern medicine has its place. This is where you can utilize those things. But I would say before you look into, going into something very, very invasive, it's really nice to have these other options available. So that way you're actually in tune with your practice, you're in tune with your life, and hopefully you can negate these problems before they become big issues, right? Of course, if it becomes traumatic, it becomes something that's chronic or something that it just can't be dealt with these other things. I mean, you're not going to eat apples because you broke your arm, right? You're not going to try to correct your daily intake of tea because you have cancer. Like, of course, you need to see a professional, right? And I'm never going to take away from that conversation because I think that modern medicine has given so much to our well-being, right? And it can't be neglected because of that. We just shouldn't use it as the go-to for small daily problems, the kinds of things that we should be more aware of on our own, things that we should be in tune with, things that we should definitely learn to adapt and correct before they become major chronic issues, right? This is what I'm really speaking about. And that will put you into a better system where not everything is specialized. I think one of the things we have to deal with in today's world is how individual aspects of our health are specialized, foreign, mysterious, just these outside ideas that we don't know how to quantify. And our own body has become a puzzle that we can't solve. And we have to seek out a professional to understand ourselves. In some aspects, this is true. I'm not denying that. I'm also saying that we've done ourselves a great disservice by removing the individual systems of ourselves and kind of relinquishing control of them because we deem them impossible to understand. If we're talking about something really specialized, brain surgery, cancer, tumors, blood issues, okay, yes, we need to have that consultation. But there are so many more things that we can understand about ourselves and become our first doctors. If anyone is going to feel discomfort, it's going to be you first. And we need to be able to know that we can correct things, that we can change things in our daily life that actually have an impact on that quality. And it's not just something that becomes normal, right? I think that the easiest litmus test of this is it's very normal culturally to go to work, for example, and to have a conversation with your coworker and say something outrageous like, "How was your weekend?" And then you respond, "Oh, I didn't get much sleep. I partied every day. I drank late at night. I had all this great food, but I had indigestion, so I've been taking these pills." You pull out the aspirin from your pocket while you drink a cup of coffee, barely awake and red-eyed, and everyone laughs and says that, Mondays, huh? And that's the normal, culturally appropriate thing. But if you were to answer with that question and say, well, I went to a local garden and picked up fresh fruit, and then I meditated during the day, and I went and got a massage and went to bed at 8 o'clock. And while you're drinking green tea, I mean, there would definitely be a certain image of you right now, right? Of being that hippie, of being that liberal, crazy person. Fair, but I think that idea, just that concept of how we've normalized the isolation of our health to professionals while creating this very outlandish idea of us being in control of our own health. And that's deemed culturally strange. For me, this idea is very interesting and very, very strange on the outside. Like now, if you're engaged with your health, that's seen as something kind of crazy. So I think that's something that we need to spend time to correct culturally, because people are designed to be close to nature. People are designed to have these practices in tune with the seasons. We're designed. We've been products of our environment for a very long time, but we spent a lot of time altering that environment to suit our most favorable aspects. I think that we need to spend a little bit more time working on that and balancing that, so that way we're not dealing with isolated pieces of health. We have a more comprehensive system, right? They all have their place. We just have to know when it's appropriate to utilize each one. And there are certain small symptoms that we can remove before we become thirsty. We can dig that well. We can put in the work, and hopefully we'll come out better for it. So that is the hierarchy of health. I hope that helps to give you kind of some window, some perspective into how you can really take control of your health this year. There's so many things that we can do. There is a very wide variety of exercises, practices, talents, skills, anything that we can learn. But I hope that everyone can understand and use the aspect that, there's so much more that we can do that will improve us as well. It's not just in class. It's not just during practice. It's during those times that we set forth to prepare. It's during the proper rest. It's during the proper meal. It's during those moments of kind of investigating your health and actually challenging yourself with, am I functionally balanced? Do I have a good range of motion? Am I exercising correctly? Am I breathing correctly? Excuse me. All these things are very important, and we should strive not to neglect them and just give them over to someone else. I hope we can all take control of our health a little bit more in 2022. I know that there's a really big call for it now because all the different health issues and everything going around now, everyone's much more aware of it. I hope we can find a balance between alternative and scientific. I hope that we can really strike some kind of balance where we can say, these are the things that we can deal with as individuals, and we can also take the time to trust science and trust, modern medicine. There are a lot of benefits of both. We just have to find a balance. We have to find that place where they can both be utilized to their full potential, because they both have so much to give. So I hope this brings some awareness for 2022. I wish you guys the best of luck, happiness, and health. If you guys are interested, there's a lot more reading material about this. I recommend it quite a bit, going to different books and things like that. Also, just going to the Ways of Wudang website. If you go to waysofwudang.com/book club, there's a -book-club. If you go there, again, I'm trying to update a list of related reading, things that you can go deeper into some of these practices. There's also some philosophy and things like that, but there's some good books on there for like basic acupressure, kind of health regulation type things with the Yellow Emperor's Classic. A lot of things like this that I think are it should become root information. It should be kind of like the norm. We know things intuitively, like if you're sick, drink soup because it's lots of nutrients, it's warm liquid, it's easily absorbed in the body. We know these things kind of intuitively. I hope that we can kind of broaden that understanding to where we can understand more of these kind of folklore, these things that are traditions. Why are they traditions? Because they're utilized all the time throughout the year, and I think that getting in tune with those practices is really important, because hopefully with that we can, fix a lot of problems preemptively. So some required reading, some related reading on the book club there. I'll try to keep updating with some of the books and the resources I've found. More than welcome to jump in the Discord and continue the conversation. So this will be the subject we'll be moving into for a while, I think. But understand this hierarchy and plan accordingly. So happy New Year to everyone. Catch you next time. Bye. Thank you for tuning into today's episode. Subscribe and join me every Tuesday for new episode releases. Also available wherever you get your podcasts. Support the Ways of Wudang through Patreon and get access to resources, classes, and more. Keep the conversation going with hashtag #TeaTalkUnfiltered or connect with me directly by joining the Ways of Wudang on Discord. Links are in the description. I'll talk with you next time for another cup of tea.